I stepped out of the car just as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting a soft golden haze over the vineyard. The air smelled like lavender and money. I smoothed the front of my navy dress, tugged my shawl gently around my shoulders, and walked toward the patio lights ahead, heels clicking softly against the stone path. No one turned. No one came to greet me. The laughter started before I even reached the seating area, not the kind you join in on, but the kind that makes you question if you were ever supposed to be there. I kept walking. My mother caught sight of me first. Her eyes paused for a split second, then moved past me like I was part of the scenery. No smile. No wave. Just polite disinterest. She turned back to her glass of wine and adjusted the napkin on her lap. My father stood near the buffet, holding a scotch. Talking to someone from Vienna's fiancé's family. He saw me. I know he did. But he looked straight through me like mist. I didn't expect warmth, but the complete absence of acknowledgement still managed to land with weight. Vienna was radiant, draped in a blush-toned gown that sparkled under the string lights. She held court like she was born to it, the bride-to-be glowing in the center of her carefully curated circle. When her gaze met mine, her smile didn't falter. But it didn't reach her eyes. She looked at me the way you look at an uninvited guest who had the nerve to show up anyway. A flicker of something passed through her expression, but she masked it before it could linger. Someone near the bar whispered, loud enough for others to hear, quiet enough to pretend it wasn't intentional. Something about how some women trade marriage for careers and end up with neither. I heard another voice chime in. Too successful. Too cold. Too much. That's why she's alone. I didn't react. Years of boardroom meetings taught me how to absorb impact without breaking posture. But I felt it. The way people gave me side glances. Some curious. Most smug. I wasn't Vienna. The doted-on baby of the family with a fiancé, a Pinterest wedding board, and a mother who made her veil by hand. I was the older sister. The one with no +1, no stories that made people coo with delight. I was here alone. By choice. Though no one ever believed that part. Aunt Lorna leaned in to whisper to someone and then laughed sharply. Something about how I scared off the last man I dated by bringing up estate planning on the third date. The joke landed, and heads turned. I stayed rooted, smiling just enough to be unreadable. They wanted me to shrink. I wouldn't. 3 years ago, I walked out of a different party with the same dress and very different intentions. I had stood beside a man my family thought was perfect for me. He was charming, polite, and made just enough money to make everyone feel like I had finally figured out the formula. Until I overheard him in the kitchen, laughing with Vienna's fiancé, saying I was the kind of woman men dated when they didn't want kids, that I was all intellect and no warmth. I didn't confront him. I just left. No fireworks. No drama. I took back my key, my presence, and my silence. That was the last time Vienna treated me like a sister. A week later, she sent a text. Just one sentence. You'll regret choosing your name on a building over a name on an invitation. Maybe she believed that. Maybe they all did. But what none of them realized was that I didn't walk into that rehearsal dinner hoping to belong. I walked in knowing I never did. And for the first time, that felt like power. The rhythm of the party shifted before anyone noticed why. The jazz band slowed. Barely perceptible. Like it, too. Sensed something was about to change. I heard it first. Deliberate footsteps on the stone path behind me. Steady. Waited. Not rushed. Not uncertain. The conversation nearest to me trailed off. Laughter dimmed. Something about the air felt charged. Like the moment before a summer storm, he emerged from the shadows of the garden arch, dressed in a steel gray suit. Silver at the temples. Posture impeccable. I recognized him instantly. Everyone did. William Lasker. Billionaire. Founder of the Lasker Ridge Group. Groom's uncle. Guest of honor. A man so wealthy and private he was almost folklore. No one moved. Not Vienna. Not our parents. Not the groom's family. A ripple moved through the crowd as heads turned and glances flicked toward one another, questioning why he had arrived late. And more importantly, why he wasn't stopping to greet anyone else. He didn't hesitate. He walked directly to me. He sat still, unsure if I should rise. Unsure if this was even real. He approached my table, his shoes silent against the flagstone. His gaze fixed. Not polite. Not performative. Focused. Intentional. And then, right there in front of them all, he bowed. Not a casual nod. A full, slow, deliberate bow. The kind meant for reverence. Not recognition. The entire garden froze. Somewhere behind me, a fork hit the ground with a sharp clink. A few guests shifted in their seats. I didn't move. Neither did he. When he straightened, his eyes never left mine. "Miss Rebecca," he said. His voice clear but calm. Low enough to sound intimate. Loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's an honor." He pulled out the empty chair next to me and sat down without waiting for permission. My mother lowered her wine glass mid-sip. My father blinked rapidly like he'd misread the entire room. Vienna's smile stiffened. Lips pressed too tight to look natural. The groom's mother exchanged a look with someone across the table. My aunt coughed to cover whatever word was on the tip of her tongue. No one spoke. I could feel the weight of their stares. Not sharp anymore, but uncertain. Calculating. I wasn't the accessory they thought I was. The quiet sister with a complex about being alone. I wasn't just tolerated. I had just been bowed to. By a man none of them would ever dare interrupt. "Mr." Lasker turned slightly toward me, folding his hands on the table. He didn't smile in a performative way, just the kind of quiet expression that said this wasn't done for them. It was done for me. And still, no one dared ask why. The music picked up again. Softer this time. Like even the band had been holding its breath. I glanced at Vienna just as she turned away, muttering something to her maid of honor with a laugh that didn't land. My mother reached into her purse and began typing. Her fingers frantic. She didn't look up. "Mr." Lasker didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His presence next to me said everything. And as the rest of the party tried to pretend nothing had happened, a single truth settled quietly between the wine glasses and floral centerpieces. Something had shifted, and they had all felt it. The rain had just begun to fall when I stepped into the glass tower the next morning. It wasn't heavy, just steady enough to mute the city sounds and blur the edges of the skyline. The lobby was silent, all polished stone and understated elegance. A sculpture of fractured glass stood in the center, like it was holding something too delicate to name. The receptionist rose before I even reached the desk. "Miss Rebecca," she said with a soft smile. "Mr. Lasker is expecting you. Please take the private elevator." The ride up was smooth. No music. No voice announcing floors. Just a quiet ascent through 48 stories of air. When the doors opened, he was already standing by the window, hands in his pockets, framed by the view of Lake Michigan vanishing into clouds. He didn't turn at first. "I've always preferred rain over sunlight," he said calmly. "Sunlight flatters. Rain reveals." Then he looked at me. "You came." I nodded once. "I did." He gestured toward 2 armchairs near a walnut table. A tea tray waited. Already steeped. Already poured. No assistants. No cameras. Just him. And me. "I'll get to it," he said, reaching for a worn leather folder. "I owe you more than tea." He placed the folder between us. "I followed your work. Every paper. Every pivot. Every time someone mistook your silence for coldness instead of control. I saw my wife in that. He blinked. He rarely mentioned her. Even in the press. Her name alone carried weight in philanthropy circles. Though most remembered her for the hospital wing named in her honor. Not the decades of work before it. She was brilliant, he continued. But no one respected her until her name was etched into stone. You refused the stone. You built anyway. He tapped the folder once, then leaned back. 2 years ago, our foundation, Atlas, was days from dissolving. Internal fraud. Financial chaos. Complete breakdown. I was preparing to close it quietly. I said nothing, just listened. And then, almost overnight, a new structure appeared. Through a shell firm, strategic funding, controls, accountability built into the bylaws, not just money, a blueprint, one I'd seen before, once, and I traced it back. Not to your firm, not to your name, but to your mind. He paused. You saved Atlas. Silently. Declined the invitation to speak. Refused the compensation. You said, do something good with it. He looked at me carefully. Well? I did. And I waited. Not to thank you. That felt inadequate. I waited for the right moment to ask what no one else has asked you. He reached into his jacket. Pulled out a second folder. This one heavier. This is an invitation. Confidential executive role. Global Sustainability Initiative. You'll lead it. Total discretion. International scope. 7-figure budget. No board politics. No public title unless you want it. I opened the folder slowly. Legal documentation. Authority. Resources. Autonomy. Why, I asked? The word quiet. His reply was immediate. Because dignity should never cost survival. And because brilliance, when overlooked, becomes our biggest loss. I sat back in the chair, the weight of it settling in slowly. I'm not handing you a golden key, he said finally. I'm asking you what you want. Not revenge. Not reaction. What do you want? That has nothing to do with them. I looked out the window. The rain traced thin rivers down the glass. Soft and certain. I want to be seen, I said. He smiled. Not with pride, but with recognition. Then don't shout, he said gently. Let them lean in. The vineyard estate shimmered in soft evening light. Fairy lights strung above white linens and roses arranged with surgical precision. The kind of scene that looked perfect from a distance. I arrived just as the valet turned to greet another couple. No one noticed me slip in. I didn't expect a spotlight. I didn't expect a warm welcome. But I had at least expected a chair. I scanned the seating chart near the entrance. A delicate display of calligraphy cards arranged on gold-rimmed trays. I searched once, then again, and a third time. Slower. My name wasn't there. A young server with kind eyes noticed me lingering. Miss, are you missing a card? I can bring another chair. Before I could answer, Vienna appeared at my side. All practiced grace and breathy cheer. No. No. It's fine, she said quickly, flashing him a smile. She can just mingle. Right. She turned to me without waiting for a response. Her voice still sweet. You know how these things go? Last-minute mix-ups. I didn't respond. There was no point. I watched her float back to her circle, her blush-colored gown catching the breeze like it had been waiting for applause. My mother stood near a group of relatives, sipping her wine, not making eye contact. She didn't wave me over. She didn't even pause. I walked toward the last row of tables, checking for anything. An empty seat. A loose place card. Something that said, Maybe this was just an oversight. There was one open chair at the end of a long table near the fountain. Next to a pair of older guests, I vaguely remembered from Dad's office parties. I reached for it. "That's for the photographer," a woman said behind me, gently placing a hand on the chair. She wore pearls and a tight smile. Vienna's voice drifted across the patio like it was wrapped in silk. "She's used to standing alone. Aren't you?" Beck laughter followed. Polite. Controlled. A ripple of quiet amusement. I didn't look at her. I didn't give them the satisfaction. My hands were warm. My pulse was steady. I nodded once and stepped back. "Excuse me," I said softly, and I walked away. Past the tables. Past the soft string quartet. Down the stone path that led toward the grapevines. The further I walked, the quieter it became. Like the sound couldn't follow me here. I found a bench near the edge of the property and sat. Still holding the small gift box in my lap, I opened it carefully. The velvet worn at the corners. Inside, a silver locket. Simple. Elegant. Engraved with the date Vienna had earned her nursing license. I had ordered it before the invitations were even printed. Back when I still believed I would be part of this. Part of her day. I ran my thumb over the date. Then closed the box. I didn't cry. Not when I heard laughter echo across the garden. Not when I thought about the years I spent showing up. Stepping back. Making space. I just sat still and let the silence settle. They hadn't forgotten me. They had excluded me on purpose. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. You don't keep fighting to be seen by people who close their eyes when you walk in. You walk out. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop asking to belong where you never did. The ceremony began just as the last of the sunlight slipped behind the vines. A hush settled over the courtyard. The kind of hush that felt curated. Chairs were lined with perfect symmetry. Florals in soft blush and ivory framed the aisle. And a quartet played something classical and forgettable. I stood near the edge of the property. Close enough to hear, but far enough to stay out of view. I hadn't planned to stay. I'd already left the gift. No card. No signature. Just a small box wrapped in gray paper. Placed gently on the table marked gifts. I came to keep a quiet promise to myself. Show up. Leave without a scene. The officiant cleared his throat and began his practiced welcome. But then another voice. Calm and unmistakable. Cut through the air. "Before this couple begins their journey together," he said, "I'd like to acknowledge someone else here today." Heads turned instantly. The quartet stopped mid-note. The officiant froze with his binder in hand. And then, slowly, Mr. Lasker stood from the front row. Vienna, standing beside her groom, smiled tightly, her fingers clutching her bouquet just a little too hard. My mother shifted in her chair. My father leaned forward. Like proximity might give him context. Mr. Lasker stepped into the aisle, straightened his cuff, and turned, not toward the altar, but toward the back. Toward me. He hadn't moved. One foot still on the cobbled path, one foot in the grass. He walked slowly. Deliberately. The crowd turned with him. A wave of silent confusion and tightening curiosity. Phones lifted discreetly. Whispers scattered like dust. When he reached me, he stopped. And then he bowed. Not a gesture. Not a nod. A full, intentional bow. "This is Miss Rebecca," he said. Voice steady and unhurried. Builder. Visionary. Woman of grit. Silence followed. Thick. Uncomfortable. Alive. No applause. Not yet. Only the sound of someone dropping a champagne flute near the cake table. It shattered. Sharp and jarring. But no one moved to clean it up. Everyone was still watching. Vienna's smile collapsed by inches. Her jaw clenched. Eyes flicking between me and Mr. Lasker, like she was waiting for someone to explain the script change. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father looked down. Mr. Lasker continued, speaking now to me, but letting every word carry. I followed your work. Quietly. Respectfully. You've built what others talk about. Sustained what others abandoned. You've done it without applause. Without asking for permission. That deserves more than silence. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The weight of the moment spoke for me. And then, one person clapped. Then another. A ripple. Hesitant. Then steady. Applause. Row by row. Not thunderous. Not theatrical. Just real. Someone behind me murmured, "Wait. Isn't she the one they said couldn't keep a man?" A second voice. Lower, but certain. Followed. Apparently, she didn't need one. I looked at Vienna. She looked away. Mr. Lasker gave me one final nod, then turned and walked calmly back to his seat. No further explanation. No need. The officiant, now visibly unsettled, cleared his throat and tried to resume, but the tone had changed. The bride was no longer the center of attention. She had been upstaged, not by drama, but by truth, and the truth had finally spoken her name. The rain had returned by the time I got home, tapping gently against the windows like it knew something had changed. I hadn't turned on any lights. The soft glow from the street was enough. My dress was still on, my heels abandoned by the door, and the velvet gift box I had carried all evening now sat untouched on the kitchen counter. The envelope was still in my purse. White. Unmarked. He had handed it to me just before I left the vineyard. No explanation. Just a look that said I would understand when I was ready. It took me 4 hours to open it. I paced. I made tea I didn't drink. I circled the couch. Paused by the window. Circled again. Part of me was afraid. Afraid it might be performative. Some symbolic gesture to soothe what everyone else had ignored for years. But it wasn't. The weight of the envelope alone told me otherwise. Just past 11. I sat at the dining table and broke the seal. The first thing inside was a handwritten note. Ink slightly smudged, like it had been written quickly. Deliberately. Rebecca. I still remember the first time I read your strategic framework for Atlas Midwest. You didn't just solve a problem. You offered a future. Vienna mimicked your confidence. But she never understood your courage. People like me. We know the difference. You didn't ask for credit. You didn't need a spotlight. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't have both. Beneath the letter was a folder. Slim. Precise. Inside. Contracts. My name. Printed clearly. My role, Executive Director. North American Division. Lasker Global Sustainability Initiative. Effective immediately. Full operational authority. 7-figure executive stipend. International discretion. Unlimited project scope. I read it once. Then again. Not because I doubted it, but because it felt like the first time someone had truly seen what I was capable of without asking me to shrink in exchange. This wasn't a title for show. It was real power. It came with reach. Resources. And most of all, recognition. My phone buzzed softly against the table. Unknown number. But the area code was familiar. He hesitated. Then answered. Hello. There was a pause. Then Vienna's voice came through. Brittle and tight. Why you? She asked. No greeting. Just that. Why not me? I didn't flinch. I didn't see. I just answered. Because he saw something in me long before any of you bothered to look. She didn't reply. I waited. Nothing. Then a soft. Unsteady inhale. And the line disconnected. I sat back slowly. The room was quiet, but not empty. It held the weight of something earned. Not handed down. Not inherited. Chosen. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying proof of my worth like a defense. I had it in writing. Not for them. For me. The rain softened against the glass. The letter rested in my lap, steady and warm from my hands. And I realized something as I folded the documents back into the envelope. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for validation. Not for a seat. Not for permission. This time, I had already been seen. And now, there was no unseeing me. The city was quiet in that particular Sunday morning way. Clean sidewalks. Light traffic. And a sky still deciding between sunlight and clouds. I arrived at the Four Seasons a little early. Not by much. Just enough to walk through the lobby without rush. Without second-guessing. The valet had nodded like he'd been expecting me. A server by the elevator offered a polite smile. I didn't need directions. On the rooftop terrace, a long white linen table stretched across the space. Framed by views of the skyline and soft jazz playing low over the hum of quiet conversation, every seat was already taken. Except one. The one at the center. A silver nameplate stood in front of it. Engraved in crisp block letters, Miss Rebecca Gray, Executive Director. My breath caught for a moment. Not from surprise, but from something quieter. A recognition that this moment had been years in the making. Even if no one else had been keeping track. Mr. Lasker stood just behind the chair, his hands lightly resting on the back of it. He saw me and gave a single nod. "Rebecca," he said. Not loudly, but clearly. "We've been waiting." Every eye turned toward me as I stepped forward. Even the servers seemed to pause mid-step. Vienna sat 2 seats down. Her hand wrapped tightly around a champagne flute. Her smile didn't move. My mother, seated next to her, wore that expression she reserved for fundraisers and family funerals. Tight-lipped, composed, deeply uncomfortable. My father studied the tablecloth like the grain of the fabric held some urgent secret. I didn't rush. I slid into the chair without hesitation, not because I wanted to make a statement, because the seat had already been mine. "Mr. Lasker lifted his glass and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for joining us," he began. "This morning was meant as a farewell brunch for our newlyweds." He glanced at Vienna and her husband. They smiled. But it looked practiced. Brittle around the edges. But unofficially, he continued, turning back to the table. "Today is about something else." He placed a hand gently on the table near my nameplate. "For years, I've watched leaders rise from expected places. Names with pedigree. Schools with polish. Careers built more on branding than substance. But every so often, you find someone different. Someone who listens more than she talks. Someone who builds without applause." He looked directly at me. "This week, I appointed Rebecca Gray as Executive Director of our Global Sustainability Initiative. She will have full discretion, international reach, and my direct support. Because leadership," he said, "isn't inherited. It's revealed." There was a polite pause. A ripple of applause moved down the table. Uneven but real. Not from my parents. Not from Vienna. But it didn't matter. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I reached for my coffee, letting the warmth steady my hand. The conversation resumed slowly. Like a car engine turning over after a stall. People whispered. Some glanced my way, then quickly looked back at their plates. I didn't fill the silence. I didn't need to. I didn't ask for this seat. I earned it. And now, for the first time, the room wasn't deciding whether I belonged. It was learning to adjust around me. The plates were nearly cleared when I placed the envelope on the table. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I simply set it beside my coffee. Just close enough for Mr. Bienes Lasker to see. His eyes dropped to the seal. I watched the quiet shift in his expression. The recognition of something long expected. Now confirmed. He didn't speak. He just folded his napkin, placed it gently beside his glass, and gave me a small nod. I peeled the envelope open. Inside, stacked neatly, were signed and notarized contracts. I unfolded the top page and slid it across the table. The paper settled like a final word. Mr. Lasker didn't touch it immediately. He glanced at the header, then the signature line, and the corners of his mouth lifted, not in surprise, but approval. The ink's dry, I said, meeting his eyes. Across the table, Vienna's husband leaned in to glance at the page. His expression changed by degrees. Confusion. Then comprehension. Then something close to disbelief. Wait, he said softly. You're the new chair, I nodded. Effective immediately. Chair of Atlas Green and the Lasker Ridge Initiative. Full authority. Full oversight. There was a beat of silence. Then it broke. My father let out a low, nervous laugh. This can't be serious. Mr. Lasker didn't even look at him. It's very serious, he said. And long overdue. Vienna sat still. Her fork suspended midair. Then slowly, she set it down and stared at me. You always wanted to ruin me, she said, voice low but shaking. You waited for this weekend to embarrass me. To make a scene. You couldn't stand that I was finally the center of something. I didn't react. I just breathed in once. Slow and steady. I didn't ruin you, I said. I just stopped letting you harass me. That was all. The table went quiet again. Not in discomfort this time, but in acceptance, like a story they thought they knew had just been rewritten in real time. Bryson, my brother, leaned back in his chair, shook his head slightly, and whispered under his breath, You just made enemies for life. I looked at him, not angry, not smug. Then I guess it's a good thing I stopped trying to make friends. I gathered my things calmly, folding the empty envelope and slipping it into my purse. Then I stood, adjusting the strap on my shoulder with deliberate ease. I turned to Mr. Lasker. Thank you, I said quietly, extending my hand. He rose with me and shook it firmly. No, he replied. Thank you, for your vision and your restraint. I've never seen someone walk through fire so quietly. I gave him a small nod, then turned toward the exit. I didn't look back. Not at Vienna, whose hands now gripped her glass too tightly. Not at my parents, who both sat frozen in some unspoken reckoning. Not at the groom's family, who no longer knew what story they were part of. But as I reached the edge of the terrace, I heard a sound. Applause. Just one pair of hands. I turned slightly and saw her. An older woman with silver hair and a velvet shawl. A distant cousin? Maybe. Or an old family friend. She didn't smile. She didn't pity. She simply nodded. Like she understood something the others never had. I smiled back, briefly, then kept walking. The elevator doors opened and closed behind me with a soft hush. My reflection in the brushed steel didn't look triumphant. It looked certain. I hadn't burned a bridge. I had built my own. And I'd finally crossed it. On my terms,